There were times, especially early in my career, where I seriously wondered if maybe I was just fundamentally broken somehow.
Hmm.
Deadlines, they felt so arbitrary and office small talk.
Mm,
It was like trying to speak an alien language.
yeah.
And even when I managed to pull off something, really innovative, there was always this nagging feeling that I was doing it wrong.
Doing it wrong. Okay.
Yeah, like everyone else got this secret instruction manual for work, and I was just this flawed system trying desperately to keep up.
That feeling, that sense of being out of sync, even when you know you have talent, that's actually a perfect place for us to start today.
Good.
We're going to dive into some really fascinating ideas based on the material you shared from Neurodivergent Power, the new blueprint for business.
Exactly. And this source, it really digs into why some incredibly capable people might struggle in those, let's say, conventional work setups.
Yeah.
It looks specifically at the experiences of neurodivergent individuals, mentioning ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, ASD, within structures that, frankly, often weren't built with their needs or their strengths in mind.
And so our goal, our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack the core arguments in this source. We want to understand that potential mismatch between traditional workplace expectations and the often untapped potential of neurodivergent people.
Right.
And hopefully offer a kind of refreshed view on what talent really looks like and how we can build more inclusive spaces.
Okay, let's get into it. One of the first things from the source that really jumped out at me was this idea of the illusion of normal in the workplace.
Wow,
He
yeah.
talks about all these invisible rules, being punctual to the minute, the importance of casual bonding, reading subtle cues, and how these standards are almost always based on a neurotypical viewpoint.
That's such a crucial point. The source argues these norms, the ones that seem so standard, aren't necessarily universal truths or even the most effective ways to operate. They often just reflect the cognitive habits of the majority, and in doing that, they accidentally put up barriers to different valuable ways of thinking and solving problems that fall outside that narrow normal.
Yeah, the neurotypical ways, as the source calls them, the sort of common patterns of thought most people have.
Exactly.
And there's that example in the source, the employee who got labeled scatterbrained. It was really compelling.
Oh, I remember that one.
Their desk might have looked chaotic, maybe they misplaced things sometimes, but when it came to generating new ideas, absolute brilliance.
Pure innovation.
Totally.
Yeah.
Coming up with solutions no one else had even considered, leading to real breakthroughs. But then the praise for the innovation would immediately be followed by criticism for, not keeping their desk tidy or whatever.
And that's the contradiction the source really highlights, isn't it? The organization benefits directly from this person's, let's call it, unconventional thinking.
Right.
But at the same time, penalizes them for not fitting the conventional behavioral mold. The core insight there is that just fitting in, blending into the system, doesn't automatically mean you're more capable or adding more value.
Which really hits home, doesn't it?
Right.
It makes you think about those times maybe you felt like you weren't quite fitting the mold even when you knew you were bringing something valuable. It challenges that deep-seated idea that there's only one right way to be a professional.
Absolutely. And that really sets the stage for the source to pivot, to shift focus from what might look like deficits to what are actually often unrecognized strengths.
Okay.
It makes us rethink traits we usually see as challenges.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Let's talk about ASD first. The source uses this phrase, machine-like precision, which, okay, might sound a bit impersonal at first glance, but it uses it to show how individuals with ASD can be like an organization's crucial final line of defense when accuracy is absolutely critical.
Yes, exactly. That anecdote about the 0.03% numerical error in the report, so powerful. Almost invisible, something almost everyone else missed. But it was spotted instantly by a colleague with ASD whose sensitivity to that kind of inconsistency was just exceptional. It wasn't just being careful. It was a real strength in pattern recognition.
And the source tackles the common perception about social interaction differences with ASD. But then it flips it, suggesting those very traits, maybe preferring directness, focusing on facts, actually build a strong foundation for the precision and repeatability needed in so many roles.
Precisely. Where some might see a different social style as a deficit, the source points out, well, this often comes with a comfort in structure, in repetitive tasks, an ability to focus intensely where clarity and consistency are key.
So not weaknesses to fix, but core strengths to use.
Core strengths, exactly, if you put them in the right context.
And then there's the whole sensory sensitivity thing. At first you'd think being easily overwhelmed by bright lights or noise is just a disadvantage in a typical office.
Right, that's the default assumption.
But the source reframes this. It calls it a heightened awareness, like a unique ability to pick up on subtle environmental details that most of us just filter out completely.
And the practical applications are fascinating, things like acoustic design or UI/UX, user experience design.
Yeah.
That example of the interior design firm, where the employee with ASD traits noticed things about ambient noise that led to real improvements for clients. That just shows it perfectly. It's like experiencing the world with more sensory data.
And I was also really struck by the point about the strong ethical compass, that dedication to consistency often seen in people with ASD.
Loyalty to the rules.
Yeah, the source suggests what might look like rigidity is actually this deep commitment to standards, which is incredibly valuable for maintaining quality, structural integrity in a company.
That quality control professional example, the one who spotted tiny deviations and prevented product recalls, that nails it.
Yeah.
It's about a fundamental dedication to accuracy, resisting compromises on standards, driven by that strong internal consistency.
Now, the parts we have here, they touch a bit less on the specific strengths of ADHD in the same level of detail. But it does mention that free-spirited creativity often associated with ADHD.
Right. It sets the stage.
And that leads perfectly into the next really crucial idea, the power you get when you combine these different neurodivergent strengths.
Yes, this is where the source offers a really compelling perspective. It uses that analogy. ADHD and ASD traits might look like oil and water initially,
Yeah, totally different.
but actually they can be incredibly complementary if you let them interact in the right way.
And that anecdote about the startup team, with members showing traits of both ADHD and ASD, that was really illuminating.
It was.
It described that initial awkwardness, the rapid-fire ideas from one side, maybe clashing with the more careful, detailed questions from the other. Sounds like it could have been really tricky.
Oh, absolutely. Potential for friction, definitely.
Yeah.
But the source points out how, over time, the roles naturally shifted towards their strengths.
Oh.
The individuals with ADHD traits often became the idea generators, right? Sparks. While those with ASD traits brought the essential structure, the methodical thinking needed to make those ideas actually work. The initial differences ended up making the final outcome stronger, more well-rounded.
That UI design discussion example really stuck with me too. The ADHD team member throws out this totally intuitive, unexpected interface idea. And then the ASD team member immediately flags up critical things like color contrast, accessibility guidelines. It wasn't shutting the idea down, it was grounding it, making sure it was actually usable for everyone.
Exactly. The synergy wasn't about one way winning over the other. It was about each perspective enriching the other. The source really highlights how ADHD traits can bring that innovative spark, and ASD traits provide that crucial framework for feasibility, for stability.
Okay, so if we accept that these different ways of thinking bring unique, valuable strengths, how do we actually build workplaces that nurture that individuality? The source gets practical here.
Yes, moving towards truly inclusive environments takes deliberate effort. It suggests concrete things like flexible working hours, letting people work when they're most focused, and providing quiet workspaces for sensory needs.
Right.
These aren't just nice perks. They're fundamental adjustments to let a wider range of people actually do their best work.
I really like that story about the team member with ASD traits who just flourished when the team started using more text-based communication.
Simple change.
It highlights such an important point. Sometimes the barrier isn't the person's ability, it's the mismatch between their natural style and the environment's default way of doing things. It's about changing the environment, not trying to force the person.
And that concept of offering choices in working modes, like having dedicated focus zones, collaboration areas, maybe exploration spaces, that's another powerful idea.
Yep.
It acknowledges people have different needs at different times and trusts them to choose what works best for their task and their own rhythm.
Which leads right into rethinking how we evaluate people and how we communicate in general. The source is pretty critical of traditional performance reviews
Understandably so.
because they often favor people who are good at self-promotion, good at the social stuff, even if their actual contributions aren't necessarily the strongest.
That story about the researcher, the one with amazing research skills but who struggled with formal presentations, that really shows the limitation.
Totally.
He was being judged less on the quality of his work and more on his ability to present it in one very specific neurotypical way. The source implies we risk losing huge talent because our evaluation methods are just too narrow.
And the alternatives, it suggests like multi-axis evaluation, looking at both quantitative and qualitative contributions,
Right.
or even letting people help define their own performance metrics. Those seem like much better ways to see the real value someone brings.
Absolutely. And that idea of self-defined metrics, that can be really empowering, especially for someone with ASD. Letting them align work with their strengths and define their contribution. And it could also benefit someone with ADHD by recognizing those bursts of high-impact work.
And communication is just massive here. The source talks about structured dialogue, like sharing meeting agendas beforehand, allowing written responses,
Yeah.
simple shifts, but they can make a huge difference for people who find rapid-fire verbal stuff or spontaneous interaction challenging.
And for those with ADHD tendencies, that point about allowing conversations to go off on tangents sometimes, that can be really valuable.
Right, it might look like getting sidetracked.
But it could actually lead to unexpected insights. It's about being more flexible, more open in how we communicate.
Plus, actively building a culture where it's okay to be wrong,
Hmm.
where leaders show vulnerability that creates psychological safety, right?
Crucial.
It lets everyone speak up more authentically without being scared of judgment.
Because ultimately, people share their real ideas when they feel safe and accepted. And fostering that safety, especially for neurodivergent folks, often starts by making those unspoken communication rules more explicit and just embracing more styles.
The source then kind of shifts gears to growth and development, saying models should be tailored, not based on some mythical average employee. I really like that challenge to the single linear career path idea.
Yes, the distinction it makes supporting growth for ADHD individuals with short-term wins versus more structured, predictable learning for those with ASD, that's key. It highlights that people learn differently, so we need to adapt our support strategies.
And that idea of personal traits reports to customized development plans, that feels like a really concrete way to actually value neurodiversity and professional growth.
It does.
It moves away from trying to fix perceived weaknesses and focuses instead on amplifying strengths.
Exactly. It's about ditching the one-size-fits-all approach and recognizing there are many paths to success in an organization. Growth isn't always a straight lineup.
Rethinking the actual job design is another big piece the source covers, challenging that expectation that everyone in a role should be good at everything the role entails.
Right. Instead, advocating for more specialized roles that align better with individual talents.
That anecdote about the 5-person team launching a product, where roles were specifically designed around traits, ADHD lead for ideation, ASD lead for structure, that really illustrates how effective that can be.
It's a powerful example. It's about recognizing people excel in different areas and designing the work around that reality.
It just makes logical sense, doesn't it? Why force someone to constantly struggle with tasks that drain them when their unique talents could be used so much better elsewhere? It's about maximizing the team's collective potential, not demanding individual conformity.
And while we're talking support, the source also looks at how technology can be a real ally here.
Yeah, this idea of tech making the invisible aspects of thinking more visible, that's really intriguing. Using tools to analyze patterns, identify stress triggers, track focus times, that could give managers incredible insights for better support.
And for individuals themselves, things like visual task boards, Kanban boards, they can be massively helpful for managing complexity, maybe for someone with ADHD. While clear communication templates could offer needed structure for someone with ASD, it's using tech strategically to bridge gaps and improve collaboration across different styles.
But importantly, the source adds a note of caution. Technology is just a tool.
Crucial point.
The human elements, empathy, understanding, actually making a conscious effort to connect differently based on those insights, those are still absolutely essential.
Precisely. Tech gives us data, but it's our willingness to act on it, to build trust through real connection and empathy that truly builds an inclusive culture.
And finally, the source really champions the strength of diverse teams, cognitively diverse teams, even if they seem a bit messy at first. It pushes back against that idea that a team of only high performers who all think alike is the strongest model.
That anecdote about the initially chaotic team ADHD, ASD, a mediator finding their rhythm, building trust, it's so encouraging.
Yeah.
It shows that those initial differences, that friction can actually lead to more creativity, better problem solving, just richer perspectives in the end.
And the keys it suggests for making those teams work: clear roles, visible strengths, multiple ways to contribute, and embracing conflict constructively within a shared goal. Those feel like really practical takeaways.
Because real innovation often comes from that healthy clash of perspectives, right? It's about learning to navigate differences respectfully, not avoid them. And realizing authenticity, even when it's challenging, builds trust and leads to breakthroughs.
The source then hits on retention, explaining that neurodivergent people often leave not because they aren't capable or engaged, but because of the sheer, silent exhaustion of constantly trying to fit neurotypical molds.
The masking effort.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Which just reinforces all the earlier points. Flexible work design that goes beyond just remote work,
Right.
proactive anxiety prevention through clear communication, diversified career paths that value different kinds of expertise. It's about creating an environment where people feel they can actually stay.
That story of the employee with ASD traits saying, for the first time, I feel like it's okay for me to be here after 6 months in a better environment, that says it all, really.
It really does. The impact is profound.
And the final really critical point the source hammers home is that accommodation isn't just a cost, it's a strategic investment.
Right, challenging that fear of expense.
It reframes adjustments as moves that fuel innovation and boost the whole organization's performance.
Those examples, the ADHD employee thriving with a reorganized workload, the ASD employee less stressed with advance notice of changes, both leading to better performance, they really drive that home.
Because fundamentally, when people feel safe, understood, supported, their full abilities get unlocked. That means lower turnover, more innovation, a more engaged workforce overall. Safety unleashes ability.
So wrapping up our deep dive into your source material today, it seems overwhelmingly clear that rethinking these traditional workplace structures, really embracing neurodiversity. It's not just about being fair.
No, not at all.
It's actually a strategic necessity for unlocking innovation and getting the absolute most out of everyone's potential.
For me, a big aha moment was really internalizing how traits we often see as weaknesses can be genuine superpowers, you know? If you just change the lens, put them in the right context.
Totally.
And the sheer potential when you deliberately bring different cognitive styles together, that's where the magic can really happen.
And for you, our listener, maybe here's a thought to take away from this. Just consider one small way, maybe in your own work or team, that you could challenge a traditional workplace assumption. Maybe it's how you run a meeting, how you give feedback, how you structure a task. Even a tiny shift can start a surprisingly big ripple.
Thank you so much for sharing this source material with us. It prompted a really fascinating deep dive. It's been truly enlightening to explore these ideas.
Absolutely. And if any specific part sparked your interest today, maybe alternative evaluation models or practical tips for inclusive teams, definitely keep exploring. We're always excited to learn right alongside you.